Thank you for calling. Please leave a message.
They build it, that's where I'm going to go.
By why, I mean what's your purpose? If you're going to live to be in 2020, you might as well play to be in 2020.
We are one global community.
The digital revolution has just begun.
Martin, welcome to the Supercharged Entrepreneur Podcast. How are you?
I'm doing extremely well, sir. Thank you for having me on. I'm delighted to be able to share some ideas.
My pleasure, my pleasure. I love your job title. You are the self-titled Impactologist.
Yes, indeed.
So I'm going to start with the question, what is an Impactologist and how did you become the Impactologist?
Well, it was the end of a very long process in terms of like 30 years of a career and thinking about what makes the difference, what's the difference that makes the difference to the people who come first in competitive situations in business, like pitches or interviews, or even pitching ideas internally for like a campaign or something. And I believe the quality of your communication can be a key deciding factor in those competitive situations. So I was looking at that and looking at all of the elements of it. Things like that I'd studied in bits and pieces all over the years. Things like body language, which was one of my particular obsessions. One company I worked with always paired me up with a voice coach. So Royal Shakespeare Company voice coaches who taught me all about warrior stance and how to breathe from your diaphragm and all that kind of good Brian Blessed stuff. And also looking at language, and it's the structure of language. So using rhetorical techniques, Aristotle's art of rhetoric, all those rhetorical techniques that you would see politicians and leaders and good public speakers use, and wrapping around all of that, something I'd always found fascinating, which is the area of confidence. You can have somebody who's incredibly talented, but put them in front of an audience, and all of a sudden their own personal confidence starts to crumble. That's evidenced in their behavior, and then their audience won't necessarily see or hear or understand the value that those people bring. So all of these things were kind of floating around, and it was always part of what I did in terms of my training and development and presentation training particularly. But it was really a pivotal moment in a conversation with a friend of mine out in Dubai who I hadn't seen for years, and he works in a very similar field. And he said, "Oh, you're going to laugh when I tell you this. My job title is a presentologist." And I said, "What?" And I had two thoughts simultaneously. The first one was rude, and I can't repeat it. But the second one was, actually, that's quite clever. I like that because it stands out and it makes me want to ask the question. And later on that evening, going back to my hotel, having had a few beers, there's inspiration in my head, and my brain just said to me, if you were going to call yourself something, what would it be? And I'd always talked about this idea of people's impact encompassing all those elements that I talked about. And the word impactologist then just popped into my head. So that's where it came from. And from that point onwards, it was very much a key differentiating point about when people go into competitive situations, they want to make a better impact to increase their chances of success. So the services of an impactologist line up with that. That's where it came from.
Yeah, brilliant. Take us back a little bit then, Martin. What's your career been like, and how did you reach some of the thinkings and the conclusions and the practical ways you help people now?
Yeah, so I started my career back in August 1991 as a sales consultant in the travel industry. I worked for a company called S.T.O.P. Started off as being called Student Travel Australia. That backpacking independent travel. Back in the days before the internet, back in the days when the only way you could buy an airline ticket was to phone the airline or go to a travel agent. So I was a travel agent. And I did face-to-face sales. I spent 6 years in that company going through various different roles, ending up in a fairly senior leadership role. And so right from the get-go, being in face-to-face sales, though that principle of what's the difference that makes the difference, we're all selling the same products, and arguably our competition, we're all selling similar products. But what makes me as an individual more successful? Then when I was a branch manager, how can we make my team more successful? So it was always that focus on the behavioral things that increased your chances of success. And then when I launched my own training and development business in 2002, then I started doing a lot more. At the time, I started doing a lot more research into things like body language and voice and rhetorical techniques. And once you start to understand the structure of success, it becomes much less like a dark art. It's like, there's that structure, there's that politician, that business person using those things. So it becomes a building of awareness over a period of time, but just relentlessly focused on what's the difference that makes the difference, and what's the difference between an exceptional speaker and a really good speaker. What are the little things that they do? And then being on my feet, training and developing, certainly always back since 2002, I had the perfect opportunity to use all of these techniques and measure them and see which ones work. How do I tweak that? How do I make that work even better? So none of my delegates ever knew they were kind of lab rats, but I was constantly experimenting with what actually works. And then that was a really interesting piece, because it's the skill of being able to take what you see done by like a president in an inaugural address, and then be able to say to other people, now here's how you use that when you pitch your new marketing campaign. Here's how you use that when you give a keynote presentation. Here's how you use that when you go for a job interview. So that translation piece I was able to do, because I spent years and years and years doing that, which ended me up giving the feedback to senior executives I do now when they want to make a greater impact and increase their chances of success.
Confidence is such an important thing to communicating in a convincing way. What are your top tips to boost your confidence in a pitch, an interview, or a presentation?
Yeah, there's a number of things you can do, which I'm always kind of tempted to jump to, but I always have to take that step back. And the bedrock of confidence is the principle I call do the work. You know, few things give you a more solid sense of confidence than being fully prepared. I mean, I can wing it. You know, I know I can wing things, and I can wing things pretty good. But there's still that little voice in the back of my head that's saying, you should have done more preparation. You know, there's that niggling little doubt. And things just don't quite go as well when you've really spent that time and prepared and prepped. And there's way too many people who think, yeah, I know this stuff. I'll wing this interview. I'll wing this presentation. I know what I'm talking about. And when they're up against, in the competitive scenario, people who are more prepared, they're at a real competitive disadvantage. So do the work is the big thing. Do that preparation work, which gives you that good sense of what I would call grounded confidence. You know you're not trying to wing it. You know you've done the work. You've thought about things. And then you can add on to it the external stuff, because confidence is an internal thing, but it's judged externally. It's judged by our behaviors. So you've got to what I call the 3 Bs of boosting your confidence. The first one, human beings, we're very visual in our aspect, in our judgment of other people. So it's how do you look? So it's how do you gesture, your posture, your facial expressions, the level of eye contact you give to people who are in the room. So all the things you do first. The first B is your body. The second B is your breath. Nervousness and fear about high pressure situations is natural, and one way we can calm ourselves down is by deeper breathing. When we tend to get nervous, we tend to tense our diaphragm, and we tend to breathe from our chest using the intercostal muscles in our rib cage, which actually gives us fast, shallow breathing. As we get fast, shallow breathe, the oxygenation level in our blood starts to dip. So our cognitive functions are the first thing that go when our oxygenation of our blood isn't as good as it can be. And because of that, our heart has to speed up. It has to beat faster because the oxygenation level is lower, so it's got to work harder to get the brain and the body all the oxygen that it needs. And that in turn makes us feel nervous. Nobody feels calm, relaxed, and confident when the heart is doing 150 beats per minute. That actually increases our agitation. So the way to shortcut all of that is, so the second B is breath. So is to breathe deeply, fully oxygenate the blood, and that slows the heart rate down. And also it actually gives the brain loads more of the fuel that you need to recall key stats, a person's name, or to be able to improvise on the spot, because your brain's fully oxygenated. It's got all the fuel that it needs. The third B is brain. What do you do with your brain? And I've been coaching people on presentation skills, as I say, for almost 20 years. And anytime I see somebody being really, really nervous, and often there's a major surprise. I used to work for a company, did a lot of senior executive coaching at London Business School. And I'd sit and talk with these people, these men and women of, CEOs of major companies and senior leadership roles, incredibly talented, incredibly experienced in the world of business. But then get them to stand up in the front of a room full of their peers with a camera pointing at them and somebody like me sitting at the back of the room with a notepad about to tear them apart, and see their confidence just plummet. And all of a sudden their behaviors change. And in those scenarios, I would always stop people and say, and ask them this question. I would say, what are you saying to yourself inside your head right now? And invariably, the brain conversation they were having in their heads was, oh, don't screw this up, or everybody else is really good, or maybe I haven't prepared enough. So it's that what psychologists refer to as your internal dialogue, that conversation that we have in our heads with ourselves all the time. So the key phrase I always share with people is, how are you talking about yourself to yourself? How are you talking about yourself to yourself? If you're saying, I'm not feeling particularly confident, I'm feeling nervous, I might forget this, I hope I don't screw it up, it almost becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy in your own head, and impacts upon not only psychologically how you feel, but then how you communicate externally to other people. So the good news is if you flip that all around and you say positive things like, I'm fully prepared, I can't wait for this opportunity. This is my opportunity to demonstrate to everybody what I know and win people over with my compelling arguments and research. And I can't wait to share that little gem of research that I found whilst doing my preparation. So the three tips are, how do you use your body, how do you use your breath, and how do you use your brain to boost your confidence. But there's no substitute for doing the work, and that boosts your confidence in the most grounded way, I feel.
That's absolutely brilliant in every sense of the word, Martin, because you've talked about some of the challenges that people face when they are put in a situation where they have to speak in public. You've talked about some of the feelings that are associated with speaking in public. And you've also provided a really simple toolkit, the 3 B's of presentation. Love that. Absolutely love that. My next question is something that you and I talked about previously, about earning the audience's attention.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that, Martin?
Yeah. So one of the things that I've found over the years is really, really fascinating is what I call the assumption of interest. When people sit down to make or to do a presentation or to talk about their company or their new product or to share their idea for a new campaign or whatever, the starting point seems to be that because the person who wants to talk about it is interested in it, because it's their idea, it's their stuff, of course they're passionate about it. There's that assumption that other people are as interested and as excited and as can't wait to hear about it. And it's just simply not true, because other people, they've got their own stuff going on, they've got their own concerns. But if you design something, if you design some presentation or sharing of an idea on the assumption of somebody's interest, then it's flawed right from the start. You're not doing any work to hook them, to grab their attention, to plug into, like you just said there, you've hit the nail on the head. They're talking about the problems that people have. And these are the ways that we get people's attention. And you see this in corporate presentations, or if you go to marketing conferences, people stand up and go, hello, my name is, I work at, we have so many offices worldwide, we get so many, we've registered so many patents, or, we're wonderful. And it's just like, it's just like so boring. We have such short attention spans these days. And of course, our mobile devices, are calling to us, or our notifications are beeping, or even if our phone is off, then that generates that FOMO, that fear of missing out. Have I just missed out a key email? Was there a missed call there? So whenever I'm working with people, I always say, look, your audience don't care. Let's assume they don't care. Let's assume the worst case scenario. How do you get them interested? And one of the ways, is how do you do that with your opening? And my challenge to people is, how do you shake people up enough so they put their phones down? How do you shake people up enough so they put their phones down? That's one of the things I always kind of put out there right at the start when people are planning how to open. And if they open with talking about their name, their company name, which is invariably on the slide anyway behind them, and start talking about the number of patents their company has filed, the number of employees or offices they have, or what year they were formed, it's like, right, we need to start again.
I'm just reminiscing to some of the presentations I've given in the past, Martin. So I know later on we're going to chat about some brilliant speakers, and I think you may even be looking to digest and explore some of my techniques and my previous
Indeed.
talks. How do we measure the success, and at what time interval should we be expecting the audience to pay attention for? Go back to the earning their attention question.
Yeah. One of the things that a guy said to me many years ago was, and it was in a sales training environment, but he said, when you're talking to a prospective client, you've got 10 seconds to grab their attention, to make them listen for another 20 seconds. Then within that 20 seconds, you got to try and get the next 30 seconds. And then with that 30 seconds, then you're looking for a full 5 minutes. And the phrase that he had that went all over that was, you're always looking to buy airtime. So buying that permission to be able to speak to people. So at the start, you think about, well, how do I grab their attention? What are the methodologies that I'm going to do that at the opening? That's a key thing to think about. And then how to hook them continually throughout a presentation. Or throughout a meeting. It's not just a presentation, but I feel like, even a round table conversation, you're still presenting for a few moments, or you might be asked a question, or asked to put a couple of pieces in, and those are all important. I need to be able to make the best possible impact and use techniques in there to keep that hook going, and there are definitely ways of doing that.
My favourite opening from recent years was Dr. Paul Redman from the University of Liverpool, and he was speaking at TEDx Liverpool in 2019, and he came on and he said, "Hi, my name is Dr. Paul Redmond, and we're in the middle of a zombie apocalypse." First 10 seconds, I thought, okay, brilliant. His next 20 seconds were, okay, let me add some context to that. I think we're training this generation for 20th and 19th century jobs, and we're creating zombies. And you were like, brilliant, great. Okay, take me on the journey, Paul. Yeah. And it's fascinating when I think back to some of the great talks I've seen, Martin, how they really grab your attention in that first 10 seconds. The next 20 seconds, I can completely see it now. And then you're right. you give them that 5 minutes and go on. Okay, you've got me now.
Yeah.
I'm here to listen.
Yes.
So my next question is, for all those non-TEDx experienced talkers out there, or perhaps those aspiring TEDx talkers out there, what happens when we have our killer opening, but then we feel like we're losing the audience's attention quickly? What do we do then?
Yeah, that's always an interesting one. And I think I always go back to the first major presentation I did when I got a job as a sales manager for a tour operating company. And my new boss came around and he said, look, it's a major client. There's going to be a load of people in the room. I hired you because I've got faith in you. But I want to check what you're doing. So can you run me through your presentation? So I said, yeah, sure, not a problem. I'll do that. And this was October 1997. So I was actually using slides. Do you remember those carousels where the slide had to be upside down and back to front, and I mean, yeah, those. So, and I was using those because I was showing. It was a tour operating company, and we did safaris in Africa. So I was showing these incredible pictures of animals and landscapes and everything else, about our product. And he had a couple of comments for me on the content of it. But one of the things that he said to me was, He said, you know, the bulbs in these carousels are ridiculously sensitive. They have a tendency to blow when you least want them to. What are you going to do if the bulb fails? And I just thought, I don't know. I have no idea. And it was one of those questions that, and being Irish, that I'm allowed to say this, you know, Murphy's Law. If it can go wrong, it will go wrong. So one of the first things is then to go, look, you know, what could go wrong? You know, worst case scenario. So if your laptop dies, great. Whenever I go and do keynotes, I've got my presentation on the very least on a memory stick, or I may well have emailed it to the people that I'm going to see first of all, so they've got it on their laptop as well. You know, have it printed out. So plan the things that could go wrong and think about what those solutions would be. Then many years ago, I was learning how to dive. I was qualifying as an open water diver, and my driving instructor, he had this was the time you may recall Sega games, you know, and I used to have this marketing phrase, to be this good takes Sega. And he had this slightly amended version of that, because if you're 30 meters down and, you know, and a diver in front of you kicks your mask off, you can't see with their flipper, and they kick the regulator out of your mouth, which is the bit that you breathe with, you can't panic. You can't panic when you're, you know, 25 meters under the water and you can't see and you've got nowhere. So he had this acronym. He changed the Sega one to SEDA, with SEDA, and that was stop. Just whatever you're doing, to stop and take a second. Evaluate. What are your choices? I can do A, I can do B, I can do C. Once you've looked at your options, then D stands for decide. Right, I'm going to do that. You know, we're much more efficient when we fully go for one particular option as opposed to half doing two. So stop, evaluate, decide, and then once we've decided, then take that action. But it just takes a few moments to be able to do that. So stop, evaluate, decide, and act. So plan for it is the first tip. Use SEDA, stop, evaluate, decide, and act. And thirdly, which doesn't necessarily apply when you're underwater, but most marketing presentations aren't done underwater, but breathe. You know, big, deep breaths will not only calm you down, but they oxygenate your brain so you can get through that SEDA process quicker, and just evaluate, you know, where do I go next? What shall I do next? You know, what are the options? And then thinking about the preparation that you've done for you, what go wrong will kick in. Now, on that big presentation that I did, just to close that loop, when I did that presentation, I did it in a big conference room with people moving around. It's kind of informal. People had like a beer, a little bit of food, and one person called them all together. I said, I've got the presentation for you now. And one person just ran back past the carousel, tripped over the cable, and all the slides fell out of the carousel deck and went scattered all over the floor. And there's now like 60 people looking at me going, I've just been given the green light to go, and now my slide deck is all over the floor, all the slides. And there's no way I'm going to get them back in order, upside down, back to front, the right way. And I just smiled to myself and I thought, I've now thought about how to do this. And I was able to roll with, okay, so the competition that I was going to do after the presentation, guess what? We're not going to do that first. So I went straight into that. And that was only because my boss had asked me, what are you going to do if the bulb blew? Now, the bulb didn't blow, but somebody knocked my slide carousel over. So I was able to use that preparation that I'd done in terms of what could go wrong to decide, well, what should I do next? And I did use that SEDA, you know, principle. Stop. Okay, what can I do? What are my choices? Right, we're going to do the competition piece, and then I just put that into place. So be able to roll with whatever actually happens.
Wow, that would have thrown me. To be fair, Martin, that would have thrown me. All those slides going everywhere. Wow. Yeah, shivers down your spine is the feeling I'm getting about some of my older presentations. And you're absolutely right. Some of the fears are very practical fears around
Absolutely,
the presentation, the deck, the room, the light, the sound. Absolutely. I want to move on. I watched your appearance on the Discovery Channel, analyzing Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook fame and his appearance on the in the US Senate, answering some particularly tough questions. What do you think we can learn from watching Mark being grilled by the Senate about answering tough questions in tough situations.
Yeah, whether it's an interview, if we're going for a job, or if we're going to see a client after something that we've rolled out hasn't quite worked particularly well, or they've had a quote from another company and they're going, look, these guys seem to be doing fantastic stuff. This doesn't equate. Come in and see us. We've got some questions for you. So there's lots of situations where in our careers we all have to answer some pretty tough questions. So I've got a model I use for that, 3 things: anticipation, preparation, and demonstration. So anticipation is thinking about, okay, what questions am I going to get asked? And yeah, write down all the ones you think that are likely, but then use a technique that I call the worst possible question technique. Now, so you think about, okay, so that's a reasonable question, but if they hate me, if they want to make me look so bad in front of everybody else, if they want to completely eviscerate me at this particular meeting, now take that reasonable question and what is the worst possible question that they can ask me, and really challenge yourself to like make this person like the worst, evilest, most horrible person in the world, and what would be the worst questions they could possibly ask. Invariably, they never ask anything quite that bad, but you're fully prepared for what they actually do. Those questions allow you then, anticipating those questions allow you to prepare properly. So you can gather the data, you can construct the answers, and you can actually practice them. If it's a high enough value, then get a colleague, get your partner, get your boss, that's always a good one, to ask you these questions, to actually prepare and actually demonstrate, kind of role play it out. And there are a few things that prepare us better for an activity than actually doing it, actually doing that. The third thing then is demonstration. So when you've got to answer a question, don't talk about it just theoretically. Show how you've actually done that particular thing. I love the line from Bruno Mars's Uptown Funk where he says, don't brag about it, come show me. I always share that line with people, don't tell me what you've done, show me what you've done, or show me what you can do. If you can do it active in the moment. So, well, that might sound like a great theory, but let me show you how this actually works. So demonstrate stuff. A few things, and that's why the pinned tweet on my Twitter account is, real experts do it live. If you know your stuff, you're able to demonstrate it and do it right there in the moment to be able to put things across. So demonstration. So anticipation, thinking about what are those tough questions. Preparation, practice and gather that data, get your boss to answer the questions, and think about demonstration, not just talking about it, but showing it, demonstrating it. So in my keynotes, I'll often do live demos. I do a live demonstration how not to say or with a question that's supplied by the audience right there and then. And that always really brings people on board, because it's like, wow, you're not just talking about it, you're doing it. And it differentiates me a lot from other keynote speakers who just show loads of theory. So if we go back to Mark Zuckerberg, and when I was watching that for the Discovery Channel, it was clear to me, absolutely clear to me, that he'd done all of that. In fact, I saw a story later whereby they'd hired some place and they'd built a set. Now, whether this is true or not, I don't know, but the myth went around that he'd actually built the set to mimic the US Senate. And for at least a week, they had got cameras and interviewers and everything else. And he'd done some serious prep for that actual US Senate meeting. And you could see that through his body language and my media training background. I used to do media training as well at London Business School. You can see it's like, oh, he's using some of the particular techniques, like the CAP technique, things like that, islands of safety, where he's not prepared to go particular places. And I'm very clear about what questions he's just not going to answer, which is another media technique. So his line was always then, well, I'll have to check that and I'll come back to you. It's like, I'm not going to conjecture. I don't want to get drawn in that particular topic. So you could see that he had anticipated, he prepared, and he was demonstrating that work that he'd actually done. So it was fascinating to be able to analyze it from that point of view when I appeared on the Discovery Channel, be able to point out some of the things. But I also point out, despite all that, he's a human being. So there was lots of fear tells as well. So with the the pronounced swallow, for example, that he was doing at one point, where you could see the nervousness that was obviously there given the pressure that he was under. So yeah, it was a fascinating piece to do, and to see that model, anticipation, preparation, and demonstration as part of what he had done.
And do you know what, Martin? I would thoroughly recommend everybody go on to YouTube and watch that video of you analysing Mark, because it was so interesting. And for me, it was all the little nuanced bits that you pulled out about whether it was a body language or the way he answered a question. There was so many little nuggets in there that I was furiously scribbling down for my next set of presentations, because I'm thinking, I do all those things. And I accept we're all on a journey, and I accept we're all in this process to learn. But when you point out some of the more obvious things like you did with Mark, it really hit home the importance of the preparation for me.
Yeah.
You know, not just understanding your stuff, but also I love that thing about getting somebody to ask you the most difficult question. I think that's such a powerful way of really testing whether you know your stuff and whether you are prepared.
Yeah.
So that's brilliant. Thank you, Martin. Slight digression. I believe one of the best ways to improve your presentation skills is through hard fought, time served, get on and do it. I know that's easy to say. One of the ways I think I've improved my presentation skills, yes, going live, such a powerful one. My God, it's terrifying, but it really makes you focus. But the second one I wanted to talk about and get your opinion on is podcasting. I've been podcasting now for just over 2 years, and because it's a self-published, self-managed, self-edited podcast, I feel like every time I interview somebody, I edit a recording, I'm learning every step of the way about how I speak, how I talk, how I present. Have you found that in your experience working with people? Have you used podcasts as a tool to help people improve?
I think podcasts are really interesting. It's a little bit, I always think about the author, Christopher Hitchens. I'm trying to remember the quote now, but it was like, yeah, he was talking about writing. And I think the same is true very much of podcasting. And his quote on writing was, let me make sure I get it right, everybody has a book inside them. And for most people, that's exactly where it should stay. So, because to do it well is a completely different set of skills. And podcasting is another one of those things. Is because you can doesn't necessarily mean that you should. And I've listened to some dreadful podcasts where people have said, "Oh, we'll go and listen to this. This is great." And I think there's a couple of things. There's content, and goes back to what I was saying. It's any podcast that is about the podcaster, I start to lose interest very quickly. I think most people do. So it's content. What can the listeners take away? What can they take away from that? You know, where is the value to them in the ideas that are being shared? Are they actionable? Can they make a real difference? Can they make, for want of a better word, make an impact when those people are out seeking to do something different? Then the second thing then is, how do you communicate that? So you could have fantastic content, but if the podcaster isn't then thinking about, how do we design this? How do we put this across? How do we frame it for my intended audience? I think that's always really important. And certainly in terms of an interview like this, you know, the questions that the interviewer asks, which facilitate an answer that your audience would appreciate. You mentioned earlier about, I can see that the problems people have. It's that bit, because people don't need solutions to problems that they don't have or they don't realize that they have. So I think where podcasts can work, and where they also, by contrast, fall down, is those two elements. The content is off, and or it's the communication of it is really important. And there's so many podcasts out there that you've got to open strongly. You've got to really be able to get across that value and that enthusiasm and that energy that, you talked about that Liverpool TEDx, the comment about zombies. It's like, absolutely, you look back at that and go, that worked, that's grabbed my attention. Now that might work in a TEDx kind of scenario, but then you got to think about what's an equivalent for a podcast. Something that works in one particular environment may not work in another. So you're thinking about your audience. You should know your audience better than anybody else, and then thinking about what works. And the third thing then, and I think this is really important, is feedback. Go to people who have listened to it and say, look, give me feedback and tell me what I might not want to hear. Don't just tell me it was good. If it was good, why was it good? Don't just give me that high level. Yeah, it was great. Well, great, that's good. That panders to my ego. I feel good if somebody says that was a great presentation, Warren. I go, fantastic. But I have no idea how I created that particular impact. So I always have a follow-up question. I encourage you or your listeners to do exactly the same thing. If you get positive feedback, go, well, why was it good? What specifically made that impact? Now you start getting real, tangible, useful information in terms of how you created your success. So you can fine tune that, you can do it more, you can put it in more specific places. The converse is also true then in terms of feedback. Well, what didn't you like? And tell me why. So then when people go, yeah, I didn't like this bit, and when you kind of talk too long on that bit, or I didn't really see the connection between that particular content and the issues I face, or it all got a bit you-y as opposed to me. You were talking about you and your experiences, and I kind of felt like it was a bit of an ego trip, that piece for me. I wanted more manageable content that I could action. So I think those three things then are really important, and particularly that feedback one, and get to why people felt that, both on the positive feedback and on the constructive, so you can do more of what works and do less of what doesn't work and change it around so it'll work better going forward.
Yeah, and there's so many similarities between podcasting and presentations, as well as them being very, very different skill sets. I completely understand that. But one of the principles I've tried to adopt in the last 12 months in my second year of podcasting is to skip the big intro. I like to say, hi, Martin, you're an Impactologist. What is that? What does it do?
Let's go. Yeah.
And I've just found from a bit of feedback and from my own experience of listening to other podcasters, I don't like the 2, 3, 4, 5 minute introduction of what they've been up to this week and how their life is and how the kids are and how the dog is. And I've met this guy's got, and I'm like, yeah, I know, I've read that. I read that on the title. Interview with the Impactologist. Yeah. That's why I'm here. Yeah. So I don't mean to be disrespectful. I know there's lots of great podcasters who do similar things, but I do think there's some interesting similarities there. Yeah, I'm going to move on. Last question for you, and then I'd love you to grill me. I saw your analysis of the President Biden inauguration speech on LinkedIn. What can we learn from public figures who have access to the best speech writers, body language coaches and voice coaches that perhaps we couldn't access?
Yeah, I think, really top public figures, when they've got access to all these incredible resources, should be using them. So they should be shining examples of how to do it well. So when I looked at President Biden's inauguration speech, and I'd seen speeches of his before, he's not necessarily he's no Barack Obama. He hasn't got that energy, that particular style of presenting. So I was like, okay, so now he is the main guy. Which tools is he going to use? How is he going to get across his messages in a way that's congruent with him? He can't pretend to be Obama. And in fact, that would be the worst possible thing he could do for his personal branding anyway. So I was looking at that and going, okay, so what are we going to say? And it was just around the time where I was just finishing off the editing for my card deck, which is coming up, being published later this year, Body Language Decoder. And he had used one particular gesture, which is called the parallel hand chop, where you bring your hands flat out and you raise them to shoulder height, and then you bring them down as like a parallel chop, almost like a kung fu chop. And that was he actually opened with that. In the first 4 seconds, he did that straight off. So it's an assertive leadership gesture that we talk about how to display your confidence. And not only did he do it in the first 4 seconds, he actually did it 78 times in the speech throughout, and then sat and counted those. So he's using that particular technique. Compare to contrast against Barack Obama, he used another gesture that's in the Body Language Decoder I call the thumb of power, where it's a relaxed fist, but your thumb is then cradled in the inside of your forefinger. So it's a softened fist gesture. So it's an assertive leadership power gesture, which is a soft fist gesture. So a fist is more seen as aggressive, whereas the thumb of power is more of an assertive gesture. Leadership, I know what I'm doing, but it's softened leadership. So he used that 93 times in his inauguration. That's a body language thing. One particular rhetorical technique that both of them used a great deal in their speeches was the technique of contrast. So saying we should not be frightened of this, we should be emboldened by the opportunity. So contrasting things like that. You know, we don't want to do this, we want to do that. So that's the technique of contrast. And Biden used that 26 times in his inauguration speech, and Obama used that similar technique 24 times in his first inauguration address. And the third thing then they both used really well was varying the speed of their speech. And again, this translates to podcast really well. So when you want to get across something that's serious and somber, you slow down. But then when you want to build to that crescendo, and this is an exciting thing that we want to do, you speed up. So I noticed this big contrast where we talk about, finish with a bang, and I measured the Biden's speed of speech. And the last section, his closing call to action piece, was actually 28% faster than the section that came immediately before it. So over a quarter faster, to get that sense of energy and passion and enthusiasm building to the crescendo at the end of the speech. So I thought I'd pick a body language thing, a rhetorical thing, and then a voice thing. So those are three things that I'm looking at. But anytime you mentioned it earlier, so when you become aware of something, then you start seeing it everywhere. Because that's the part of your brain called your reticular activation system, or your RAS system becomes aware of something, and then once you're aware of it, you spot it everywhere. And that's what I love about learning about different tools and techniques, because it takes the veneer off what's happening. A guy I coached many years ago, I said, a very senior executive, and he said to me on the day, he said, I've loved what we've done. I absolutely fantastic. I've learned loads, but I want you to know I will forever hate you. And I'm sorry, you're just going to have to qualify that. You've had a great day, you've learned loads of stuff, but you hate me. He said, yeah, because there was some part of my brain that liked to believe that the greatest speakers in the world, like Barack Obama, so this was a number of years ago, we spent a lot of time dissecting him, and that they had some special gift, that there was some extra little gene that they had. And it's almost like you've ruined the illusion for me, because now I know how it's done. Because I do what I call thin slice. I'll show 10 seconds of a speech, stop it and go, what just happened? And then thin slice, share the techniques. And it was almost like being shown how to do a magic trick. We want to believe in the magic. And then when somebody comes and shows you how the magic trick's done, it's like, oh, I like the idea of magic. So there was that piece. So look at public figures, and they should be shining examples. Public figures aren't always shining examples of how to speak well, but certainly President Obama and President Biden were two shining examples of how to use those techniques well. And I think this is an important thing for everybody, in line with their own brand. They weren't trying to be somebody else. They were trying to be what was a colleague of mine 3 years ago? He said, you're not trying to be somebody else, but you're trying to be yourself with more skill. Be yourself with more skill, and that's what he did. Biden didn't try to be Obama. He didn't try to be Kennedy. He wanted to be himself with more skill, and that's what I could see happening.
I mean, there's literally a machine gun effect of takeaways from that last segment there, Martin. So thank you again. It's absolutely fascinating. We have reached that point in the show which I've been dreading. So without further ado, what feedback do you have on my impact from watching some of my videos on YouTube?
Well, being a big fan of the rule of three, I looked at 3 of your clips. So the first one I looked at was one on your social media engagement post. And it was fascinating for a number of reasons, because it was the first clip that I watched. So obviously my brain is going, okay, so this is how Phil does his thing. This is his brand. This is the way he does it. And it's probably one of your most energetic and dynamic clips, because you did 59 hand gestures in a minute. I sat and counted them all. Now, a lady called Vanessa Van Edwards, she has a fantastic business on body language and does in-depth analysis. And she did a TEDx talk in London a couple of years ago, where she and her team spent hours and hours and hours going through all the top TED Talks with the question, how many hand gestures do the top speakers do? And the number they came up with was the top rated TED speakers gesture 25 times per minute. Now you were operating on 59. So that's way above
Oh my God.
what the top speakers were doing. Now the bottom ranked TED speakers were, so they're good, they're TED, but they were averaging 14. Now after I found that out, I was doing a big presentation for the Chartered Institute of Marketing, and I got a colleague of mine to, actually it was Andrew, who you know, he came along and he videoed it, because I said, how many am I doing? And I was averaging 22, and I consider myself to be somebody who's pretty handy. So I'm looking at your 59 and I'm going, oh my God, does he do this all the time? This is pretty full on. And then it was when I looked at other two, it was like, no, this is very connected to this particular post. It's not how you generally do things. You're much more, and take this in a positive way, you're much more average in other podcasts. But I did notice that 17 of them were what we call precision gestures. And precision gestures are where you take the tip of your thumb and the tip of your forefinger, and you show us like, almost like you're holding something very small. One of the gestures that I call that you do is called a pinch of salt. It's one of Barack Obama does a lot, where it's almost like you're holding a pinch of salt between your thumb and your forefinger. But so it basically says, I understand detail. I've grasped the detail. I know what I'm doing. And so 17 of your 59 gestures were precision gestures. So that one was quite interesting from that energy. And I was pleased when I watched some of your other posts that you don't gesture 59 times per minute in all of your posts. It was just that particular one to get across a particular message.
Okay, great.
The second one that I looked at was, or unless you want to clarify anything, do you want to ask a follow up on that?
I don't think I want to clarify anything ever again, Martin, but thank you for giving me the opportunity. No, please carry on. I'd like to hear about the second one. This is really, really good. Thank you.
So the second one, the influencer post, and this is a constructive one. Now we talk about credibility and confidence and convincing people that you're competent. And what I call the three magic C's of impact. You know, an audience, particularly one who don't know you, they have to have each one of those three boxes ticked to know that you're a person to pay attention to, you're a person to hire, or you're a person to actually buy from and work with. So confidence, confidence, and credibility. So how do we measure those? Well, one of the things I measured in the influencer post was your use of what we call weaker language. So within that minute, you said kind of twice. You said might, perhaps, and I hope. So all of these words don't get across that message of confidence. It's called like we call it weaker language. And often it's used as a hedge. You know, you're not saying, I guarantee you this will happen. I think it was many years ago, you talked about Liverpool earlier. It was Rafa Benitez. I remember, wasn't he one of the Liverpool managers years ago?
Yeah.
And I remember seeing him interviewed. There's only a couple of matches into the season, and he said, I guarantee that Liverpool will finish in the top three. And I remember thinking, you can't, unless you've invented time travel, you can't make that guarantee. Now, I love your enthusiasm, I love your self-belief, but you can't make that kind of guarantee. So we look to hedge, because obviously what happened at the end of the season, Liverpool didn't finish in the top three and he lost his job. So he kind of made that big, bold statement, but it backfired. So I understand hedging. You don't want to overcommit. But at the same point in time, if you use weaker language, then people's belief in you will start to erode. If they hear kind of, might, perhaps, hope, or should, or the one that always really annoys Yoda, try. I'm going to try and do this. So we need to be able to flick that, be aware of the underlying message that some of our weaker language might give, and then look to correct that. So I'm always giving people feedback on, particularly we see lots of prevalences of tries, or hopefully, or when people are doing presentations, say, I just want to quickly bring you through this. Well, why quickly? It's either of high value or it's not. If it's high value, tell me at a reasonable pace. If it's terrible, don't do it quickly, just don't do it at all. It's either got value or it hasn't. So all these little language patterns that I pay attention to as well, in terms of that overall impact. So in the influencer post, I know there's a bit of a prevalence of kind of, twice, at least one, might, a perhaps, and a hope. And when you put those together, you think, yeah, that doesn't really get across that confidence and competence and credibility that we're looking for. So that was some feedback from the influencer post.
Mm.
I'm going to finish strong, so I'm going to make you feel good again. The strategic and tactical post. That was an interesting one that I watched. And one of the things you did particularly well in there, and again, you notice I'm modeling my own advice from earlier. I don't say, oh yeah, it was great. Now I'm going to go into detail as to why it was great. So one of the things you did particularly well was your use of vocal emphasis to communicate clearly. And when we're communicating with other people, there's lots of words and sentences, but which ones should I really pay attention to, or which ones are really important? So an exercise that I often do when I'm doing training on this is I put up the sentence, I don't want to work with George, and I say it flat with each word. Then I say it again, but I change the emphasis. And then I say to them, okay, so what does this sentence mean? I don't want to work with George. 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 Now, by shifting the emphasis on each word in the sentence, the meaning changes dramatically. So when we're communicating with other people, we're not communicating words. Words are the medium to meaning. Words are the medium to meaning. To communicate meaning, we need the recipient's brain goes, yeah, I'm hearing these words, but where's the key word? What does that actually mean? And one of the ways that you can do that as a podcaster, as a speaker, as a salesperson, as a marketer, is to be very careful about how you use emphasis. Emphasize key words so that your audience, be that one person on a telephone call or a Zoom call, or hundreds in a keynote, or 20 or 30 people in a meeting room, emphasis. Make sure you put emphasis on those key words so that the meaning is emphasized and the meaning is clear. And this links back to a nervousness. When we tend to we're overly nervous, when we're not prepared and we haven't boosted our confidence, our voice tends to flatten out. All of these variants tend to flatten out. We tend to go really kind of bland and boring when we're really nervous. All that variety comes out of the voice, and emphasis often suffers. And then that's where people misunderstand. They go, oh, well, I thought you meant, or didn't you mean this? And the person's going, well, no, I thought I was clear. Yeah, your words were clear, but your meaning wasn't clear because you were nervous and your emphasis was lost. So therefore you knew what you meant, but your audience didn't. So I looked at those 3 posts. So from the social media one, it was that gestures. The influencer post, there was that kind of weaker language. And then in the strategic and tactical post, I thought your use of emphasis was fantastic. So I thought I'd finish on a positive note for you.
Thank you, Martin. I appreciate your thorough feedback, and genuinely, it's lovely to get such a seasoned professional like yourself to analyze and to help me understand how I can do better. So I'm literally, again, scribbling furiously in the background here. All the things that I'm learning from you today. It's probably been one of the most powerful interviews I've done in the last couple of years, if not for the sheer volume of takeaways, Martin. That's the number one thing I'm going to take from today's session. I just want to finish on a point that I think lots of people will resonate with. Over the last 12 months during the pandemic and the lockdown, a lot of us have spent a lot of time using online video conferencing tools like Zoom, Teams, etc. For me, it's been a real double-edged sword. Half of me has gone, oh my God, I can see every little thing that I do now, and everyone watching can see every little thing that I do, and we're so focused on watching the face. The flip side of that is I've also been thinking, I've learned a lot from watching my face for 8 hours a day for the last 12 months.
Not all of it good, yeah.
Not all of it good necessarily, no. But have you experienced that, Martin, with the people you've worked with in the last year?
It's been absolutely fascinating. I mean, teleconferencing and video conferencing isn't new, but the volume of it and the frequency of it, as you know, with lockdown, has absolutely exploded. For me, there have been a number of key takeaways. And it was interesting. I saw something on LinkedIn the other day with somebody saying, well, as a company, we've allowed people the option to turn their video off. You know, if they're feeling uncomfortable with their home environment, they don't want, you know, not everybody has the luxury of a nice office, you know, to work in. We're kind of more junior staff, like, oh, I'm a bit embarrassed. It's kind of my bedroom, and I'm trying to orientate my screen so there's nothing embarrassing. And every time I move it, there's something embarrassing in the background. So they were kind of giving them the option to turn the video off. And I remember thinking, I understand why you'd like to give employees that option, but the damage of not being available visually to people, so they can't see you, they can't really, because we are, you know, at the end of the day, we're very visual creatures, and we're very, very visually oriented. And even as I'm saying this, you know, you're nodding, you know, what I'm saying is resonating. And if I can't see you as a speaker, that leaves me with that doubt: is what I'm saying landing? Does it make sense? Is anybody getting this? And so there's definitely a thing there for people about, be aware of the downsides of not having your video on. Okay, your company might give you the option, but then you're less available. They literally can't see you. They can't see that enthusiasm. They can't see what you're putting across. They can't see if it's resonating with you. And I got asked recently about this, and I said, well, one of the things about how to make Zooms more engaging, you know, Zoom fatigue, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, well, one of the things I do is if I'm running a course with, like, you know, 6 people on the camera, I'll be looking at their faces, and I'll say something like, you know, and, you know, if you've ever been to a bad conference and a speaker's, you know, been really nervous, you know how that impacts. And then I'll look for somebody to go, and I'll go, well, Phil, that seemed to resonate with you there. Why don't you come off mute and tell us what your experience was? So that not only makes it interactive, but also then somebody is rather than being randomly invited to speak, they're being invited because something that I've said has resonated. And then they're much more likely to want to speak, as opposed to me randomly picking somebody and going, so Phil, tell us about your experience of when you've had a really bad speaking. But you go, let me think. So you're going to somebody who hasn't necessarily emotionally resonated with what's being said. The other thing is that, you know, human beings, we're incredibly egotistical, and you have to force. I find myself, Rob, I've become rather obsessed with how my neck looks while I'm talking. So, and it's one of those things that goes, God, it looks a bit weird down there. That's so strange. And it has to become, and I use this word very, very deliberately, a discipline not to look at me and to look at the participants, because, you know, our egos are incredibly fragile. I mean, we get drawn into looking at ourselves. Like, I'm not the audience. There's the audience. You don't walk on stage with a conference with a mirror and look at yourself. You look at your audience. You know, so there is a discipline to that. And I think, like anything, when you're doing it a lot more, you discover more of the nuances. And I think the last year, because this sheer volume of Zoom calls we've all done, there's certainly been some realizations. But I think to the audience, even if you're offered the opportunity to have your video off, I would always say have it on. We're used to not everybody's got a brilliant background, but what you will lose in not being visually present to people on the call, I think, is much worse.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. My top tip, just to add to that, is when I'm talking to somebody on Zoom, so a one-to-one call like this, Martin. In fact, I'm doing this right now. I've got your face front and center, and my face to the left is actually covered up with my notes. So I'm following your advice already, which is good news. At least I've done one thing right today, Martin.
You're blocking yourself.
I'm blocking myself, and I'm focusing on you. And it's really, really disconcerting, because I know I'm on the screen. I know I'm being recorded. But you're absolutely right. It helps me pay attention to you, and it's all around that active listening piece. Really trying to be involved and engaged with the speaker or with the person you're talking to. So, Martin, I'm going to have to bring this session to a bit of a close, because as much as I could carry on all day, I try to keep to time with these sessions, and I've got another 25 questions that I'm going to ask you after we finish, and maybe, who knows, there'll be a follow-up sometime in the future. Final point from me really is, I know you've got a deck coming out this year that I know you're obviously very, very keen to talk about. Why a card deck instead of a book or instead of a white paper? When's it coming out? What's it about? And how can people get hold of it?
Yeah, so the title is Body Language Decoder, and that it should be coming out October-ish. I'm just getting some feedback from the printer about when that's coming out. Great question about why is it a card deck? And I think, well, the thing for me, and I will often considered writing various different books, and one of the downsides of writing a book about body language is it's an incredibly visual thing, so it's lots of words to describe what you can say. And when I got approached by this publisher, I loved the concept, because it was going to be a deck of cards. On one side is going to be an illustration of the body language thing that you're talking about. And then the flip side is the description. And I was just brilliant. That's exactly what I want, because we are visually oriented. People will look at it first, and then they'll go, okay, with that visual imprint, then they'll flip over and then they'll read the conversation. And it's split into particular decks. So I mentioned there's a section on confidence. So you can take those confidence cards out, and then you can look at them. You can take those to a meeting that you're doing and have them on your desk and go, yeah, I must remember to do the pinch of salt. I must remember to use my double hand shot. I must remember to do my thumb of power. Yeah, I'll use that for that bit. So you can lie them out on your desk as little visual reminders, as opposed to like Post-it notes in a book. So I love not only the visual aspect of it, but the fact of how you can actually use it. Or if you're going to, if you're assessing, and let's take it into the personal world, a builder, and you want to make sure that they're telling you the truth, you might lay out the deception cards and go, yes, have I seen a gestural slip? Have I seen one of those crooked smiles? You can lay the decks out and look at them. So they're very user friendly as well as being more visual. So yeah, more information about that. I'll keep updates on my LinkedIn profile. As you said, there's little tools and tips and videos on there. So I encourage your readers to go find me there, and I'll keep people updated when it's coming out. But at the moment, it's scheduled to be October.
Brilliant. Finally, Martin, how can people get in touch if they want to make more impact?
Well, the best way to get in touch is at LinkedIn. So if you search the words Martin Brooks, BROOKS, and Impact, you'll find me there, and you can follow me there. You don't have to connect if you want to just look at the tools and tips and videos. And of course, if you've got a big scenario, your listeners have got a big scenario coming up, big presentation, big pitch to a client, or even a job interview, and they want to make the best possible impact, I'd be delighted to have a conversation. And like you, just do that analysis and pick out what are you doing well and what could you do differently to make a better impact, and share some tools and techniques to give them the maximum chance of making the maximum impact and maximizing their chances of success. Love to work with people on that basis.
Martin, you have made an impact in my life, in my speaking, my presentations. It's been a fantastic session. I'm very, very, very grateful for your time, Martin. And I know there is 101 takeaways there that I'm going to take, let alone the people listening to this podcast. I'm going to wrap up by saying thank you. And it's certainly the time in our lives coming out of the pandemic when we need to make more impact. We need to move forward. We need to present with confidence and get our business back on track. So it's been an incredibly poignant and timely reminder of the ability and the importance to give great presentations. So once again, thank you, Martin, and have a great day.
Thank you. You too, Phil. Take care. Thanks for the opportunity.
Pleasure. Thanks, Martin.